Ha Dao, who joins us all the way from Hanoi, Vietnam. She's one of the contributing writers to our recent publication that accompanies the eponymous exhibition that just launched this past week in conjunction with it, a career survey of the work of renowned photographer Greg Girard, who also joins us today, spanning over 50 years. I should not pick favorites, but Ha's essay in the book really is truly a standout. Rather than just discussing Greg's photographs in and of themselves, she really situates them powerfully in a time and at a place, and it gives really rich context to looking at the pictures and in new ways to engage with and understand Greg's work. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Ha Dao.
Hello, thank you, Elliot, for the very generous introduction, and of course, thank you everybody for taking the time to be here on a Sunday. Thank you, of course, to the Polygon Gallery and Greg Girard for extending the invitation to deliver this presentation as part of a retrospective exhibition encompassing such a long and prolific career. So like many other people, I have known Greg Girard's work from social media and through books, but it was a real pleasure to encounter such large size prints on display. And looking at them, I've been browsing them, been returning to them quite a bit during this trip to Vancouver. And looking at them and returning to them, I'm reminded of something that I deeply believe in as well, that the act of photography really begins with paying attention to particularities, the way light hits certain surfaces, for a split second, and how objects, very common objects like hotels or a pack of cigarettes on the bed can tell us something about someone's life, their routine, how they live. And so long before I had the language to articulate the attention to the vernacular and to grounded realities, have also shaped my photography practice, both as an artist and as a community organizer who works to deliver exhibitions, publications, and programs in Vietnam through the independent space that I co-run in Hanoi called Matca. It's like matcha without the H. So actually last year in December, we had the pleasure of hosting Greg's workshop in Hanoi, and the conversations that began there really, have brought me here to Vancouver again. So in this presentation, I'd like to offer some context for the work we do, and also for the broader photography conditions in Vietnam. I will share how photographers like myself carve out spaces to work and to exist despite limited infrastructure, while also inheriting the complex legacy of the event known internationally as the Vietnam War, which still remains a defining chapter in the medium of photography. So let me begin with some self-introduction. This is a screenshot from my website that gives an overview of past projects. I work with both photography and moving image. As you may already be able to tell, I don't really have a signature style. So each project really calls for a different visual approach. But all of them were responses to daily reality in Vietnam, sometimes observational and sometimes speculative. For example, the non-certified copies work. It's over here. I'm not sure. Oh, I cannot point. Anyway, the one on the bottom left is a compilation of close-up images of nail designs, turning tiny objects into abstract landscapes. I'm also interested in how private lives become public narratives through mass media. So for example, in one project called All Things Considered, I reconstruct a real murder case that took place a few years ago based on news reports and court hearing. So you can see more of that in my website. This is Linh Pham, a photojournalist and co-founder of Matca. He works primarily with international news outlets and more frequently now with the New York Times, which reopened its bureau in Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon, a few years ago. He has photographed several authors. I'm sorry, the screenshot might be a bit too small to see, but you can see the late Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh in his final years. Also Kim Jong-un during his visit to Hanoi. And a portrait of Bao Ning, it's the black and white photo, author of The Sorrow of War novel. And on the right here is a more recent report on a golf course by the Trump organization that is being built in Vietnam right at this moment, and how the Vietnamese government set aside its own land regulations to fast-track the project. So today, when you type Vietnam onto a search engine, you'll most likely encounter images such as this. As the country emerged as a popular travel destination. And it is also the kind of photography that gets funded and promoted by the state with familiar motifs such as timeless natural beauty, or more overt representations of national defense. So these are the dominant images coming out of Vietnam today, and they differ quite greatly from those produced 5 decades ago that still define how Vietnam is seen. Some of you might have recognized these images. They are sometimes referred to as the Vietnam triptych. All of them were taken from the late 1960s to the early 70s. So from left to right, the Saigon execution by Eddie Adams, the Napalm Girl by Nick Wood. I put a question mark here because of the recent controversy. And The Burning Monk by Malcolm Brown. So these were published on major news outlets, and all have won prestigious awards, some even credited with helping to stop the war. I don't really feel compelled to speak further about them today because they have been quite extensively seen and discussed elsewhere. But even if you know nothing about the context and just consider them from a visual aspect, it's quite striking how closely they share the same motif and the same emotional register. I'm assuming you're all quite familiar with Susan Sontag. In her classic book on photography, which questioned photography's ability to sustain political action in what she called an image-choked world. But it was only later that I discovered that On Photography was actually built upon an earlier book called Trip to Hanoi in 1968, which I briefly mentioned in my essay for Greg's catalog. So after the visit to North Vietnam as an anti-war activist, she tried to grapple with the realization that the Vietnam that she has imagined through American media did not correspond to the one that she encountered on the ground. I should add here that almost every family in Vietnam had some kind of connection to the war. And in fact, my own parents lost their fathers during the war. And in the 2000s, I remember them, taking long and arduous journeys to to retrieve their father's remains. And today, it's the same journey that many families are still taking still. So the impact of the Vietnam War on civilians was so immense that in a way it was quite normalized. So Linh Phạm and I, we were born in the 90s, long after the country has opened up to follow a market-oriented model. And while our parents and grandparents lived through incredible hardship, our generation did not experience the war directly, but instead we came of age during a period of relative stability. And so we were really encouraged to look forward, to pursue opportunities and a life of material comfort that past generations could only dreamed of. So perhaps that's why my generation has quite a complicated relationship with the images and the writing produced during the Vietnam War that still remains central to the global photographic canon today. If you've been to Hanoi, you see these scenes kind of everywhere, but sadly, due to recent regulations, they are also becoming a thing of the past. I think, Greg, you have a similar photo. I mean, mine is not as nice, but this is Linh Pham, Matca's co-founder, in conversation with another photojournalist, on a spot, on the sidewalk for beer hơi, which is a very light and cheap draft beer. Often had with some of the best foods in the world. And this is in fact our Polygon. In the absence of a center dedicated to seeing and discussing photographs, some of the most engaging conversations took place in casual third spaces like this, where, over beer we can complain, gossip, and even critique each other's work. It is where hierarchies could soften a little. Then we cheer, the glass is empty, everybody goes home. But as much as I enjoy these conversations, the problem is they remain unrecorded, and they're often confined to people who are in, like a certain photography circle. And for timid newbies like we once were, they're quite hard to enter. And so when Matca first emerged as a online journal about 10 years ago in 2016, we made a point of featuring and making accessible photography practices connected to Vietnam that existed beyond the established circuits of visibility. So we made a point of reaching out and featuring photographers who have never had the chance to exhibit, who lived outside major cities, and whose names really led to no results when entered onto a search engine. And then in 2019, we had established our physical space in Hanoi in a quite a political center called Ba Dinh District, while the website offered immediate access and wide exposure. It wasn't until we opened our space in Hanoi that the presence became really anchored in public life. So there wasn't really a blueprint on how to run an independent photography space in Vietnam. So we tried a bunch of things and see what would stick. At first, exhibitions seemed like the obvious place to begin because photographers have no outlet to show their work, and the audience really, have no chance to see what our photographers are doing and making. So creating that platform for exhibitions felt both necessary and exciting. And it was rewarding to facilitate these kind of encounters between underrepresented artists with the public. And the tasks also include constantly providing context and explaining and advocating for contemporary practices that were quite unfamiliar with many visitors. But over time, after a couple of exhibitions, we realized that exhibitions really demanded enormous amounts of labor, money, and infrastructure. And none of us, as working photographers, had the desire, the capacity to become gallerists or run a commercial program just to keep the lights on. And so we gradually shifted our focus, building a program that is lighter, more flexible, and easier to sustain. So you can see some of that here. Photo book showcases, workshops, talks, and things of that nature, all of them free and open to the public. So subconsciously, we might have adopted the logic of the beer garden, which, it can be with plastic chairs, it can be quite quickly assembled, it can be expanded or reduced in size whenever necessary, and it can also disappear in a second. Because in certain way, both Matca and the sidewalk beer aren't supposed to exist. whether it's conducting business on the sidewalk or hanging photographs without permits. Occupying public space in Vietnam comes with a certain cost, and it means constantly negotiating gray areas. So from a distance, our space really resembles any white cube gallery from a distance, but looking out of the window, you can actually see the Ho Chi Minh Museum, on the opposite side of the street. So it is a very concrete reminder of the particular landscape that in which our work takes place. So alongside all of this, trying to sustain our own photography practices and running an independent space with no real business model, we've also been trying to educate ourselves on the history of photography in Vietnam, a type of history that is written from the inside. Our generation grew up on the internet, which gave us great access to contemporary global photography discourse. But at the same time, there's this very strange pain of not knowing your own history, the absence of a comprehensive and accessible institution, the lack of it has created a strange dissonance. So, why do I know more about, a Western master like Henri Cartier-Bresson, but not like a Vietnamese photographer that should remain essential to my own history? So with that question, we began looking. Sometimes it meant wandering through vintage stores where old publication prints and other kind of printed ephemera would surface. These are called orphan images, divorced from their original authors and context. So we just started collecting and not knowing what exactly to do with them, but we simply felt that they gave us an idea of what kind of photographs were made, how they circulated, and how they were presented in a physical form. So over time, our own collection became like a social space with people dropping in and donating the materials. So the collection continues to be built through this kind of relationship. It wasn't until just a few years ago that we were able to go into the Vietnam News Agency archive, which hosts the largest number of images made by Vietnamese photojournalists during the Vietnam War. But even getting through the door requires, a letter of introduction from an institution. We were able to obtain one from the British Council, but if you are a independent researcher, just wanting to look, you had a hard time getting in. But gaining access is really the first step. But being able to use and interpret the images is a whole other challenge. And in 2018, we were delighted to learn about the very first museum of photography in Vietnam. It was not built in major cities like Hanoi or Ho Chi Minh City. Instead, it was located in a small village on the outskirts of Hanoi that is regarded as the birthplace of photography in Vietnam from the late 19th century. Their photography is regarded less as an art form, but more like a craft, similar to silk or ceramics, for example, where it's passed down among villagers. And this presents a very different origin story from the one that is told from the French perspective, which credit colonial photographers with introducing the medium to Vietnam and establish the first professional photography practices there. So the question here isn't really where photography in Vietnam began. I'm sure there would be more than one answer, but who gets to tell that story? So in 2019, we self-financed and published our first book called Market One, A Photography Village, as one response to that history of the village. We interviewed surviving practitioners from Lai Sa village, although sadly some of them have passed away. Among them was a studio in Ho Chi Minh City with roots from the village that existed for more than 3 generations. We also interviewed a craftsman specialized in hand coloring black and white photographs before color photography became popular. And one of the most remarkable discovery was a century-old family album shared with us by the youngest son of an owner of a prominent photography studio whose business once had several branches across northern Vietnam. So it really offered a rare glimpse into the everyday life of a local businessman during the French colonial period. And we created an exhibition from these vernacular prints. It was quite well received, and we sold out 500 copies within a year. So this gave us the encouragement needed to make another book. So this is the second volume of a series called Matca 2 From Here On Out. It is a series of booklets featuring 4 bodies of work by contemporary Vietnamese photographers. There was really no grand curatorial premise other than to bring together the works that we have known and loved and thought deserve better recognition. So the subject matter ranged from soaring real estate prices, traces of Vietnam in Switzerland, animals soaked in rice wine, and just domestic life at a small town in northern Vietnam. So these are the kind of projects that were driven mainly by a sense of urgency and a curiosity about society. But they, don't have the kind of buzzwords in contemporary photography discourse today. So presenting the works on the page is our own small way of giving them the legitimacy and presence in cultural life. In order to publish a book in Vietnam legally requires a permit from a state publishing house. It's a process that I wouldn't go into detail today. But basically, my first application was rejected, and here's a text message with the editor, basically because of the work of the animals in rice wine here. She was hesitant to approve the application because she feared that it would encourage alcohol consumption. Anyway, after several rounds of negotiations, I had no choice but to make a different application at a different publishing house. And finally, this time we got it, and it is the red stamp of approval. Our most recent publication called the Unofficial Archive. I actually brought a copy today in case you might want to browse them later. It's called the Unofficial Archive because it is our own response to the lack of an official, accessible archive of photography in Vietnam, and it returns to the question of access. It brings together materials from our own collection that were produced and circulated within the country during and after the period of the Vietnam War. We also included, a brief bibliography just for ease of reference, but not really to suggest any kind of continuity or evolution. The publications that were found are incredibly diverse. Some of them are artist monographs in the conventional sense. Other are books that was sponsored by the state that use photography to construct political narratives. And sometimes the boundaries between the two become quite blurred. One example is a book called Vietnam in Flames. It's one on the top right. It's a coffee table book that remains a very rare visual legacy of this, the short-lived state of South Vietnam. It was published in English to appeal to international audiences and brought together both combat photography and landscape photography by established photographers Nguyễn Mạnh Đan and Nguyễn Ngọc Hạnh in an effort to generate support and legitimacy for the Republic of Vietnam. Getting this book is a whole other story, but in short, it was shipped from the US to the UK, then hand carried to us to Vietnam, by a friend. And another example is the one on the bottom left. It's called From the Red Square to the Red River, which presents photographs made by Soviet photojournalists to celebrate the Vietnam-Soviet Union relationship. It was published in Moscow, but in Vietnamese in order to circulate and appeal to Vietnamese audiences. So these examples really remind us of how photography has always been a tool shaped by both domestic conditions and transnational exchange. Researching these publications sometimes led us to unexpected discoveries. So this is from a catalog published by the Ho Chi Minh City Association of Photographic Artists, comprising photos from 1975 to 1995. I'm not quite sure if you can see, but on the top left, we have a version of The Burning Monk by a Vietnamese photojournalist. He was actually put in jail later on because of his involvement with the South Vietnam government. While Malcolm Brown, the one with a well-known photo, received a Pulitzer Prize for its work. And the one below that is another response to the napalm girl. Now as a grown woman, smiling and holding a baby with visible scars on her back. So these unexpected encounters really emerge from anonymous boxes found at secondhand stores. So while working on the Unofficial Archive, I kept returning to this book. It's called Warring Visions by a Canadian Vietnamese scholar named Thi Phu, based in Toronto. Her book really expands the canon of war photography beyond images of spectacular violence by including also state-produced and personal photographs. So that approach directly influenced my own approach to the Unofficial Archive by bringing together images that were made during under different and even opposing ideologies, interests, and material conditions to create conversations that official histories really do not allow. This is actually the only publication that we publish underground without a permit, because we know that it would never be approved. When it was first showcased at the Martin Parr Foundation as part of the Books on Photography Festival in Bristol, the UK. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Looking at Greg's work today at the Polygon, I'm reminded that photography doesn't just tell us what has happened or what a place looked like. It also revealed to us what someone thought was worth noticing at a particular moment in time. Sometimes, noticing and paying attention to particularities involves making images. Sometimes it involves listening to the silence, preserving old materials, reaching out to other photographers, or creating spaces where different histories can sit beside one another. So I hope in our own small ways that is what we're doing at Matca. So thank you very much.
Oh, and we do have time for questions. If there are any, I can bring the mic to you.
Anyway, I'm not sure if this is a bit too niche to... Yeah, but one of my favorite directors is Canadian, your David Cronenberg, and it is from, it's one of the crazy movie called Naked Lunch.
Thanks so much, Ha, for that really interesting and illuminating introduction to photography in Vietnam. My question is, every country has regional differences and stereotypes and preconceptions. In Vietnam today, I assume there's the normal regional differences and both collaborations and divisions. But you know, this long after the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, how much are those differences connected to the political history, and how much are just regional differences in terms of photography?
You mean regional differences,
Like
as in
North versus South?
right? It's a good question that I really have no comprehensive answer for. You know, being based in Hanoi, the history of photography, or even like of cultural products that came out from the South during the war, is something that I know for a fact is being actively ignored or even erased, and one that I kind of felt not just curiosity, but a vague sense of responsibility to know, you know, considering my work in photography. I think we still have a long way to go in terms of reconciliation. I think there are still a lot of unresolved tensions, and, you know, considering the fact now that, as I mentioned, the kind of forward-looking attitude that is kind of being imposed on us at the moment. But, you know, like, how can you look forward to the future if you are ignoring your own past? So yeah, that's my personal response to your question.
So thank you again for coming in today for this really wonderful talk. My understanding is that Hanoi is currently going through a very large redevelopment project. How do you think that'll impact the way that Matca can operate as an organization and as a project?
It's funny you mentioned the like current, you know, like for those who don't know, we have a new government, and you know, massive land clearance campaigns are being conducted across the city. And in a way, it really reminds me of Greg's work in Shanghai back in the early 2000s. I do think that Vietnam looks at China a lot, you know, for guidance and inspiration on, you know, how to run the country. So I was wondering, you know, who is the Greg Girard of our generation, you know. But that aside, does it affect Matca? I think yes and no, in the sense that eventually, you know, because, you know, our space is located in an area that will probably be impacted by the land clearance, so our space might cease to exist. Not sure when that will happen, but at the same time, I think, as said, you know, we don't really have a real business model, and so I really have no answer when being asked, like, oh, what's your plan? You know, how are you going to sustain this space 5 years from now? We are approaching our 10th year anniversary, and, you know, in the lifespan of a independent artist-run space, you know, that is, you know, quite a mature age. I would say we kind of run on survival mode all the time, which has been working for us so far, but it's not really a model that I recommend for anybody. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. That was really important, I think, for an institution like ours, the Polygon, where photography is the ground, but, you know, it's the ground very differently in a city like Vancouver than in what you're describing. And I'm really fascinated with the the kind of dual influences that you sketched out between this kind of press history coming from the States, and then also the dialogue, let's say, with Moscow and with the Soviet realm at the same time. But that's just a comment, and I'm just really grateful. My question is more about your essay about Greg and the way you write about his position as a visitor that's coming with a certain different attitude than maybe a lot of the people that have approached your ground in a way where they are assuming they know it before they know it, or something to that extent. And I just with your writing practice, I was wondering what other artists or visitors you've attended to in your writing, or maybe in collaborations, and if you could say a little bit about the terms that interest you in those collaborations, being at Matca. I just thought it was such a beautiful, such a beautiful text about what it means to not be the tourist, but at the same time respect the position of an outsider. Like, you draw that very careful. Maybe I'm not sure if I'm summarizing your argument in a good way. Maybe you could do it a little bit, but I'm curious about your collaborations beyond Vietnam and what interests you there.
Yes, sorry, give me a moment to kind of process. I've known and loved Greg's book called Hanoi Calling. And, you know, just being interested in photography from Vietnam, I'm always on the lookout for, you know, new works, new projects connected to Vietnam. Doesn't matter if it's by, you know, a foreigner or like a, you know, someone from the country. I think positionality is, you know, a topic that is being discussed quite often these days in contemporary discourse. And yes, I think it's important to acknowledge, you know, your background, where you come from and all that. But at the same time, I don't think, how should I say this? Like, I think, like, for example, just because I'm from Vietnam, for example, like, I wouldn't really assume any kind of expertise that, oh, I know more about the country, than other people, because I think personal experience is one thing and it's important, but it's not everything. And so, yes, sorry, what was the question?
Collaborations that are interesting for you, like, for you personally, for Matca, for the organization?
I mean, we've been very lucky to be based in Vietnam, but connected quite globally. So, you know, for example, quite prominent Vietnamese American artists working in photography, like Anh My Lê or Dinh Kieu Lê, who sadly passed away. And what else? Sorry, it just escaped my mind at the moment. But I think my photography practice, when I started out, I was really lucky to attend a workshop in Siem Reap, Cambodia. It's called the Angkor Photo Workshop. It takes place every year, and I was under the mentorship of Saurabh Hura and Antoine Dagata. So I was quite prominent artists that I'm lucky to have been to receive mentorship. Oh yeah, that's just something that off the top of my head. Yeah.
one of the photographs in your presentation was the one of the Napon girl. And certainly there's a film that's come out, which has raised a lot of questions. How has it been in Vietnam, both North and South, that you might know of the discussions of controversy over this particular photograph?
I know this question would come up. Funny enough, even though the film was released on Netflix, and I have a Netflix account, but I haven't been able to watch it there for some reason. I'm not sure if it's because of like geographical limitation or something. But anyway, but I've been able to watch it because someone sent like a link. It's quite funny because I think I'm not really in a place to judge. And I'm not saying that I know anything more about this topic than the next person. But, you know, when Gary Knight and Nick Wood were in Hanoi, you know, that's where we met. You know, if you watch the documentary, they were in Hanoi for a workshop. And I met both of them in person. And actually the workshop was... the context was the workshop was called IMMF, which stood for Indochina Memorial Fund, something like that. Anyway, it was set up by photojournalists who kind of made their mark during the Vietnam War, including Tim Page and James Natchway, to educate local photojournalists, you know, like to actually go out and work as professional press photographers. So yeah, I was a bit surprised to see that bit not be included in the documentary because that's where they met in person. I mean, I said like I can't really claim any kind of expertise on this kind of topic, but if I have to be honest with you, it was a bit disheartening when it came out, not just because of, you know, like, it's not a matter of who's right and wrong, but to me, it's kind of disheartening that, you know, like the kind of news about photography in Vietnam is still related to, you know, what is considered an iconic image. And I have nothing against its status of being an icon. I think, you know, it had its own place in history, but I guess its status has kind of overshadowed other conversations and works that I think are more central and more urgent to my own experience, that I wish were discussed more. But yeah.
Is there one more question? I think we have time to take one more.
You made reference to a scene around documentary photography that was in a smaller, more regional location outside of Hanoi that you said was very influential. I wondered what the circumstances were for that kind of activity to happen.
You mean the museum, or?
I thought it was like a group of photographers, or did I understand that correctly?
The village you meant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's go back to the slide. So even though it's called a museum, I think the size is roughly the size of this room. So it's a rather small museum, and I said it's a village museum, you know, which kind of explains its operation a little bit, because it's funded and run totally by villagers, and a lot of the items were donated by relatives or families of the photographers who work during the French colonial period. This photo was taken by someone, sorry, his name slipped my mind at the moment, but these are the superstars in music and film in Saigon during the 50s and 60s. And he has an incredible, collection of portraits, glam portraits by them. So it was quite surprising to see this being included in the museum, because as said, a lot of the cultural products that came from that time period, including music, could still be considered as sensitive or even banned outrightly at the moment. Sadly, the village, the current generation, really cannot continue their family's practice. Most have moved on to other ventures. So it really stood as an important legacy, but sadly not one that is being continued.
Well, if there aren't any other pressing questions, maybe we'll leave it there. Thank you so much again for this fascinating, illuminating talk, and for, opening all of our minds and deepening the ways in which we also experience the exhibition here at the Polygon right now. So thank you again.
Thank you very much.
And for those of you who were not here on Thursday when we opened the exhibition, the gentleman in the very colorful shirt at the back who asked the first question is Greg Girard. The artist is present. So this is also a great opportunity. Like I said before, Ha's text in the book is fantastic. There are copies available. And Greg, if you twist his arm, might sign a copy. So please feel free to enjoy the Polygon, enjoy the exhibition, get a copy of the book if you can, and thanks for being here again today. Have a great rest of your afternoon.